Hello, and in today's video we're going to be asking the questions: what are intrusive thoughts, and is it normal to experience them? So first let's talk about the difference between thoughts and intrusive thoughts. So thoughts, well, we get thousands of those every day. They seem to sort of pop up and they pass through our minds, sometimes helpful, sometimes not so helpful. We talked about negative automatic thoughts in previous videos. We can also have positive thoughts as well. They can be triggered by songs or situations, things like that. And we get thousands of these types of thoughts every day. So that's just normal everyday thoughts. Intrusive thoughts. Well, intrusive thoughts are negative thoughts that are very unwanted, and they almost like create a bit of a shock, a bit of a. They're very difficult to ignore or dismiss because they sit very uncomfortably with us. They're very abhorrent, or they're very unacceptable in some ways to us, and that can come in the form of doubts or urges or images in our mind. And sometimes they're also known as obsessions or obsessive thoughts. And the difference between intrusive thoughts and everyday thoughts is that these intrusive thoughts are very alien to us in the way we see ourselves. They're kind of against the morals and the values that we have and our views of ourselves. So when we get a thought like that, that can be very kind of scary for us, quite shocking for us, and sort of shake us. And that makes it very difficult to dismiss. Now, the people who often struggle with intrusive thoughts can often be people with different types of anxiety, like health anxiety or generalized anxiety. But we also see this very commonly in OCD as well, and they're often called these obsessive thoughts. Now, I guess in answering my first question, are these thoughts normal? Are intrusive thoughts normal? Well, the answer is absolutely. They are absolutely normal. The majority of us experience them at some point in our lives. It's very common to have intrusive thoughts. Now, in 1978, there was some research trying to understand OCD and how therapy can help. And they wanted to answer this question: is it normal to experience intrusive thoughts? And it was really interesting because when they asked people who didn't have a diagnosis with OCD what their intrusive thoughts were, and also people who do struggle with OCD and asked what their intrusive thoughts were, they then mixed these thoughts together on a page, and they handed them to the therapists who've experienced working with OCD clients, and they couldn't tell the difference. They couldn't tell who were the OCD clients and what their thoughts were versus the non-OCD clients. So it was really showing how it's very normal to have these intrusive thoughts that might seem very abnormal to people when they're experiencing them, but actually it's really, really common. And another study from the Journal of Clinical Psychology found that 94% of individuals reported experiencing unwanted intrusive thoughts at some point in their lives. And here are some examples of some of the intrusive thoughts that people had reported during these studies. So you can see here a real mixture of different types of thoughts related to themselves or other people, animals, experiences, that are all pretty horrible thoughts when you think about it. Not very nice things to be thinking about. But again, these are things that, everyday people, whether they have an anxiety disorder or not, have had at times in their life. Now, the answer to this question, a cognitive behavioral therapy perspective, is that it's not about the thoughts. It's not the fact that you're having the thoughts that's the problem. It's about our interpretation of the thoughts, what those thoughts mean. Sometimes we call that the appraisal. What's our appraisal of those thoughts? And also a sense of responsibility that we feel that we have about those thoughts. So we know that they're common, and we know that the thoughts are also similar whether you have a diagnosis of an anxiety disorder or not. So for somebody who maybe doesn't struggle with OCD, for example, they might have an intrusive thought, think, that's a bit weird, that's a bit unusual, and sort of let it go, just sort of pass it off and, not think too much of it. But for somebody with OCD, for example, or other anxiety problem, they might get that thought and then they start to try to understand it. What does that mean? Why have I had that thought? What does that say about me if I've had that thought? Does that mean I'm a bad person? Does that make me a risk to others, for example? They start to explore and try to understand why we've had this thought, and also feeling a sense of responsibility that because I've had this thought, well, what do I do now? What if that thing comes true? If that thing's come true and I've already thought about it, then that makes it my fault, that I should have acted, I should have done something about it. So again, there's lots of sense of responsibility around the thoughts that we're having, thinking that because we've thought it, we need to do something about that. But then also there's an interpretation about those thoughts that they are somehow dangerous, or that they mean something. And if we think that it means something, then we're going to get caught up in these kinds of loops and feel very anxious and tense at the nature of having these thoughts. Now, often the reason why these intrusive thoughts are so shocking for us and so uncomfortable for us is because they are the very opposite of who we want to be, in our own values and morals. We call this kind of ego dystonic. They're like the opposite of our sort of sense of self. And and that's why they're quite shocking for us. So when we get a thought that really conflicts with who we want to be, or what we want to happen. So if I have very family orientated, and my family are my everything, and my children or my wife is so important to me. If I get a thought that some harm might come to them, well, that really conflicts with me, and that probably will sit really uncomfortably with me to have that thought, which then can, if I interpret that thought of being some kind of sign or some kind of thing that might happen, or that I have to do something about that to avoid that happening, or that thought is anything more than really just a thought, then it's going to cause me probably some worry and some concern there. And then when we feel very anxious and worried and tense, when we get those thoughts and we've interpreted it in this way, then of course that's going to have a knock-on effect with our actions, and that's where we might do certain things to try to feel a sense of control, or be able to suppress the thought, or distract ourselves, or try to stop the thought in some way, or to try to stop what we fear might happen as well, to sort of resolve ourselves of that responsibility that we feel we have. So it can have some really behavioral kind of consequences there through our actions, which is often when I talked about OCD. We can have obsessive thoughts, and then there's the compulsions to be able to deal with those obsessive thoughts because they feel so uncomfortable for us that we feel we need to do something about it. Now, these are all things that you can explore within talking therapies. So if any of you are struggling with this, with intrusive thoughts, and I hope this video has been helpful to shed some light on really answering that question, that actually these are normal experiences. It's more about how we perceive them that's the problem. And there are lots of techniques and lots of ways and discussions that can be had within things like cognitive behavior therapy to be able to help if you're struggling with these. So I hope this video gives you a little bit of insight into intrusive thoughts, and I hope it maybe encourages you, if you are struggling with them, to reach out and seek some support, because there's definitely things that we can do to help you. Okay, take care. Have a lovely day.